to address something that was kind of frustrating about my job. So I told y'all how I don't trust anyone who gossips, and the thing is, I feel like people who actively gossip about other people, I feel like they're never living like happy, fulfilled lives, because I feel like in a lot of ways, like if you go around talking bad about everyone around you, it's like, it's because you don't want to talk about your own problems that are happening in your life. So I do honestly think people who are always gossiping, talking about other people, are not living great lives themselves, and that's why it makes them feel better to assume other people are just as miserable as they are, and that's why I feel like someone would take pleasure in gossiping like that, because yeah. So anyways, I don't participate in it because I just don't. I find it very fake, because I mean, it's like they'll be talking about people that are supposedly their friends. Like, that's your friend and that's how you talking about them. And like, yeah, I would never want to be friends with someone who gossips and talks smack about them, because I just could not trust them. I would not trust them with any of my personal information. And witness basically this firsthand. And another thing that happened this morning that was really frustrating, and this is just me sharing, you know, because I don't like when people do this. I work with kids on the spectrum, right? And some of these kids have other issues other than just autism, but autism being a spectrum means, you know, there's people who are autistic that are high functioning, and then there's people that are autistic and have, you know, less abilities or more challenges, because it works both ways. But regardless, I had this coworker basically say something that I found really disrespectful about one of the clients at my center. And I'm not going to share like specific details, but basically she was just like, kids on the spectrum can't learn 2 languages because they're on the spectrum and they're special ed. And I was so angry that she would say such a thing, because I feel like there's this huge misconception. Someone being on the spectrum does not mean they can't learn or understand things the way other people do. And I often think like people assume, you know, people on the spectrum that have more challenges, especially if they're nonverbal, people often assume they don't understand. And so I was trying to explain to her, as like, no, this child can understand more than 1 language, just because, and it was just very ignorant. And I basically just have to say, so the child spoke Spanish and English basically, but they're nonverbal. And the other therapist, my coworker, was basically like, they need to just teach him English, because he's not going to be able to understand anything if his mom only talks to him in Spanish. And I was just like, I can't believe you would, one, say that about someone else, how someone else like raises their child. And also, it's just like, how dare you assume that a child on the spectrum is not capable of understanding more than 1 language. Because I know that this child does understand both. And so basically, she's also not from the US. So she also said, like, well, when I was trying to teach my daughter my language, she couldn't speak English well, and so I just stopped speaking to her in that language, because it's common actually for, you know, kids who are growing up bilingual to mix together the languages when they're learning how to speak. And basically she observed her child doing that, which is perfectly normal. Sometimes they do develop speech later, but it's because they're literally learning 2 languages at once. But those kids who are bilingual are developing speech for 2 different languages at the same time. So a 2-year-old that's babbling is going to make babbles in both languages if they're learning more than 1 language at the same time. But basically she was like, it was confusing my daughter, and I just stopped teaching her that language and only spoke English to her. So that's why, and he's on the spectrum, so it's going to be even more difficult because he's not like the normal kids, and therefore, and it was just making me so angry because, one, I was just like, it's not true that kids on the spectrum do have more challenges, but it's not like their ability to understand is not necessarily what is the problem. Sometimes it's just their ability to communicate. But I don't like people that assume a child is like not capable of doing something just because they're on the spectrum. And it's like, it's so limiting. It's like you're limiting her views are like so limit to the child, and I just don't agree with that. And she's honestly made other comments that I felt were very ignorant about some other children in the center, and it's like, I don't want to argue with people, but at the same time I'm just like, we literally in our training learn like, don't assume things about these kids just because they're on the spectrum. Like, I'm not gonna assume a child is not capable of learning 2 languages because they're autistic or anything else. So I just found that to be a very frustrating experience that I had, and I literally just had to walk away because I was trying to explain, like, you know, by kids who grew up learning 2 languages at once are very, very it's like I can't remember because we did learn about this in one of my psychology classes, and basically their brain processes and language differently than most people because they literally are already, when they're learning speech, they're learning 2 languages at once, which is better. It's easier for those people to learn languages if they're learning them at the same time they're developing language, because you can learn way more as an infant, toddler stage. Like, your brain just is way more active in your youth and it's a lot harder to learn a new language as an adult. But there's a lot of like misconceptions about it, and I honestly feel like she just was not well informed about it. So she was making very ignorant comments and statements, in my opinion, that I did not like and I did not agree with, assuming that the client in question would not be able to understand English if his mom only spoke Spanish to him, which I'm like, he literally is around people speaking English all day. If you think this child is not capable of learning to understand English because his mom only speaks English to him or Spanish to him at home, you don't understand how language works. You know, the best way to learn a new language, y'all, is to immerse yourself in that language. Like, one of my cousins, her dad lives in Spain, right? She used to spend summers in Spain, and after a while she learned how to speak Spanish. You know why? She was surrounded by nothing but people speaking Spanish. The same way a lot of people who come to the US who speak other languages, if they are immersed into the US culture, right? American culture, and consuming American culture and listening to English, eventually they're going to learn English. You know, people also do take, you know, ESL and I think some other like language classes to help them. But I feel like if you live somewhere long enough and you're surrounded by people who speak that language, eventually you're gonna learn it, because you have to learn it in order to, and like, you may not learn it proficiently, but you're gonna learn it enough to like survive and communicate with other people. And also, I feel like if you are going to another country or planning to live in another country, you should make effort to learn the like native tongue that people speak around there if you want to be able to survive and communicate. I do think it's like, it would be wrong to assume like I could move to an Asian country and not ever make any attempt to learn that language. But anyways, I guess that's a different point. I just felt that it was a very ignorant assumption she made, basically also saying like because the child was special needs, which is just like, I don't know, it almost is like she was trying to assume their intelligence because they were autistic, and I just don't like that. I would never put limits on what a child can or can't do, and I feel like if you don't believe a child is capable of doing something, you put limits on them because you're not challenging them enough. So it's just like, I know if people continue speaking English to him, he is going to understand that. Like, there's nothing wrong with a child on the spectrum learning to understand multiple languages. And if you believe it's impossible for that kid, that's really just you limiting them, not them actually being limited. Could it possibly take longer for them to understand it? Maybe, but I also think it's like too much assumptions are already too many things are already being assumed about the client, and it's just like, it was really frustrating, y'all. And like, when I tell y'all I had to walk away because I was like, this is making me actually angry to hear someone make such like an ignorant statement about a child, and just like, and also like just be like, I'm right, you don't understand, you don't know, they're special ed, they can't do this, they can't. Like, I would never say this child can't do something. I would say, it might be more challenging for this client, or maybe this is something we have to work for them to develop, but I will never limit what a child can or cannot do just because of their diagnosis, just because of whatever. And I feel like it's other people who limit a lot of these kids. And that's the unfortunate truth about some therapists working with kids. Like, my child too, that I had been working with for a while, she also assumed like that child couldn't do a lot of things that he can now do. So I'm just like, she's, I don't know, it's frustrating. And I feel like sometimes you just can't reason with people like that. So I just have to keep it pushing.